Welcome to Behind the Wines, a freshly bottled podcast about Australian wine, the wines we love, and the people behind them. My mission is simple. I want to get down into the cellar with sommeliers, stomp some grapes with winemakers, and have chats with our finest critics, growers, retailers, and chefs. In this episode, we're at the MCG for Old Bottle Day with the MCC Wine and Food Society, and despite some clangs and bangings coming out of the kitchen, it provides the perfect setting for a fascinating chat with the renowned wine critic, author turned online distributor, the one, the only, Jeremy Oliver. Welcome to Behind the Wines, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. Great to have the opportunity to have a chat.
What is your current role with the MCC Food and Wine Society, and what does that involve?
Well, that's a good question. So, London Wine and Food Society. I think I'm not a life member, I'm a something member. And it's because years and years and years ago, I think they realised they didn't have an event at this time of the year. And I got tapped on the shoulder to host, I think it was an Ian Kerville concept, which he called the Old Bottle Lunch. And there would have been 20 or 30 people in the old long room way back when. And basically I had to taste the wines that people brought along and sledge them and talk about the wine, discuss, find the one that was the best. And it sort of has grown a little bit like Topsy. And so we've been doing this for quite a few years now. So here we are, 20 odd in our third decade. And yeah, so I don't have an official role, but there's unofficial sort of haunting presence, I suspect it is.
What are you looking for in an aged wine?
I'm looking for an aged wine to have a story that it's telling, which means if it's not been cellared well or has been cellared beyond its prime and is in decay and decline, it's lost that ability to tell its story. So basically something that is intact and vibrant, and preferably, because even the greatest and the oldest of old bottles that are in great condition still bring a suggestion, a memory, a presence of their youth. In addition to that, you have all the interesting complexity and character and structure and texture that might have developed over time. And so what you're looking for is to try and find something that's got this harmony, this expression. Really, it's talking of its place, of its time. And even if you want to go to ridiculous extremes, sometimes I get the opportunity to taste ancient wines, hundreds, 150 whatever years old, 200 years old. And you taste wines like this, and the interesting thing is you wonder what was going on in the world, what was happening when that wine was actually harvested, and in what conditions was it made, and what was going on. And sometimes you taste wines that were grown and made during the Second World War, for example. Some great vintages there. How were they made? How did they do it? And sometimes it puts a hair upon the back of your neck when you think about what was going on with these extraordinary old bottles that do survive the journey.
In a way, old bottles could be sort of like a time capsule.
Absolutely. And the sadness is, ask anyone who's got a cellar, and this is the real sadness. And you heard that sigh because it's happened to me so many times. And I don't even have a proper cellar anymore because it's just too difficult and it upsets me so much. But only about 25% of the wine you keep is actually going to deliver what you think it's there for, what you bought it for. And it's a terrifying statistic. It could be the cork, it could be the previous ownership, it could be any number of features that causes a wine not to do what you're hoping and praying it will do. And you're talking to someone who once with one of the greatest winemakers of Australia ever, John Wade, who created the Wynn's John Riddoch wine with the 1982 vintage. We once put together a dinner at a house of mine quite a few years ago, and we'd organised wine and food, and we'd organised matching champagne all the way through to a dessert wine. And Brent, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. 100% of the wines that we organised for this meal were corked. 100%. And I'm a bit of a cork taint magnet, I know. If anyone's got a corked bottle of wine in a room, it will be me. But that was astonishing. And you go, why do you bother? So many tears you end up shedding.
I guess what I'm hearing then is with aged bottles, it's important to limit what can go wrong with them.
Yeah, and also not buying wine that has been stored for some period of time by someone in conditions you have no firm knowledge about. So I always tell people, check the level, check the cork, check the provenance. Even in my new business, we have a provenance classification. So people can look at an old bottle that we might be selling. It's got a a classification on the provenance. So take some of that risk and some of that gamble away. But that's the critical thing. Don't go and buy a bottle of Grange from a platform when the odds are that bottle of Grange has been stored under someone's bed for 25 years. It's just don't do it.
I had a great example of that with a mate of mine from Sydney who'd been waiting for years to share his prized Granger. And he brought it down and it was corked. And of course he was mortified. But when you delved into it, there were many red flags of why it was probably going to be corked.
Oh, yeah. So I always tell people, when they've got those kind of bottles that they're not really too sure about, I say, look, yeah, go ahead, make an occasion, but always have a backup bottle in case, So that's a piece of little advice there, but always have a backup.
Having spent so many years as a wine critic, what qualities do you believe you need to be an effective one?
Oh, gosh. I think an ability to constantly learn, that is the key. If you want to be taken seriously, and I look back at some of the opinions I had when I was kicking off in the early to mid 1980s, and I'm pretty proud with most of it, but there were things I really had no clue about. And I think it's recognizing that a progression with wine, along with anything else, whether it's fine art or music or sport or whatever it is that you do learn along the way. And you have to keep learning. You can't stay caught in that little time capsule again of, in my case, 40 odd years ago. And to do that, you've got to place yourself in front of the greats. You've got to taste the great wine with the people who understand them, who, if they didn't make them, at least the people who can explain them to you. You've got to, or I think it goes without saying that you have to have some level of palate. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to interpret what's in front of you. And it also helps if you have a memory. But I think that constant seeking to improve, seeking new knowledge is essential because the industry is constantly changing. And I would say, to be honest, no wine industry in the world changes faster than the Australian wine industry. And that's not necessarily a good thing. But to try and keep on top of what's going on and then to try and say to people who might find themselves heading 100 miles an hour down a cul-de-sac as far as wine quality and style is concerned, to say, no, what you're doing is wrong. It's better if you did it this way. You were doing it better 20 years before. So I think some of that experience is important. That's not to say there's great joy, and I love it when really good new people come into wine who've got gifted palates. They learn. And I think part of the actual learning process has to involve having worked in vineyards, having worked in wineries, having worked in the trade to understand how the trade operates, having as well, it's essential. Otherwise, you can find yourself creating content that is irrelevant. And you also, I think you need to have an understanding of the wine buying market and the way it works, and it moves and changes over time. There are, of course, specialists. There are the great European writers, of Burgundy, and you go to, that's the Burgundy special, here's the Bordeaux specialist. That's great. But in a country like Australia, I think you've got to be more of a generalist, and you have to understand Australian wine. And also with the massive movement into our wine culture of imported wine, you absolutely have to have a good solid understanding of world wine, where it fits in and where the two intersect. So once again, you're not going to do that if you're not determined to keep learning.
I was a big fan of your books, and what always impressed me was that you'd often find some wines that were around $20 or $20 to $30 were rated equal or even higher than some of the more iconic labels. Did you ever feel pressure not to be biased towards those iconic wines?
Wonderful question. Forgive me, I'm going to sound rude. You've got to be prepared to piss on statute. And there's not one in Australia upon which I have not done that. And once you realise that, yes, it's going to cost you invitations to lunch, it'll cost you. I mean, there were years I identified Brettanomyces in Henschke's Hill of Grace 1998. I was the only and first to do that. It's now regarded as commonplace knowledge, but I wasn't invited to a Henschke tasting for at least 12 years. Which cost me because it's hard to get the opportunities to taste these wines. I've done the same with Grange, and I'm currently persona non grata for Penfolds because I'm being honest about my impressions of their wines. So yes, there is a risk inherent, but I don't write for wine producers. I write for wine drinkers, and I'm 100% independent, and I don't get paid by wine producers for scores or to taste wine. So I find that abhorrent. So I'm old enough to come from a time when I started writing. If you could convince an editor to give you a column, you became a wine writer. That's all you had to do. And then you were basically given some measure of carte blanche, what you wrote about. And if your content was good enough, as a result of your content, there was enough readership for them to sell advertising, which you had nothing to do with, then you kept your job. So if you became a profile person, a profile critic, and a lot of people have done that and done it very well, then the advertising would follow and you maintain your job and your independence. There was no commercial pressure. But contemporary media landscape, not just in Australia, but world over, has changed completely. And wine columns don't exist by and large in most newspapers. They exist in platforms or online publications or something. And it's very difficult for a wine critic to make an income these days, which is why I, in the middle of COVID, going, well, there's no income coming in here, what am I going to do? And I first thought of creating a wine bar, but I'm glad I didn't do that. It's totally the wrong time, as far as I'm concerned, to move into hospitality. But the business I've got now came from that. And it basically, and I'm totally upfront with this, it generates its income from wine sales. So wine producers don't pay me. I end up paying wine producers. And I select wine only when it's amongst the best of its kind at whatever price point it is. So, and I'm talking to producers all the time. They're saying, why aren't you selecting me? I'm going, well, your wine's not quite good enough. You did this, 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 and this, and this. It would help you get better. And then come back to me next year and let's have a look. So I'm trying to help raise the standard. Whereas, unfortunately, most people who would consider themselves to be wine critics in Australia these days are actually cheerleaders and are paid to be so by the producers.
Going back before, you said that for a wine critic, it's important to have a good palate. In terms of a palate, do you think it's something that can be developed over time? And are there things that people can do if they want to improve or develop their palate?
Gosh, that's a 1, 2, or 5, Brent. These are, okay, palates. I was at Roseworthy College doing winemaking, so I did sensory evaluation subjects, and we were taught and tested on our ability to identify pure compounds. So we had to learn several, in my day, well over 170 pure compounds by smell, taste. Then we had to identify them in wine, whether they were good or bad. And it also helped if we could identify the wine in the process. Now, that was a lot easier 40 years ago. There weren't quite so many SKUs produced by Australia. There are thousands now, literally, as we're all aware. And it's a lot harder. To give you an example, if a red wine had Merlot in it, tasted like it came from Western Australia, it would have been Cullen, Cabernet Merlot. I used to pick it every time and people thought I was a genius, but it was the only bloody one it could have been. So that's one way to develop a palate, going and doing some kind of training like that. The other thing, and this is a different kind of answer. We as a species don't need anymore to be able to smell and taste the way we once had to do, because our food is generally safe and reliable. It's not going to hurt us. Now, that opens up another can of worms with all sorts of chemicals are added in the process, but let's leave that to the side. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about spoilage organisms that will make you unwell. So our predecessors, people would smell and taste to make sure that the food is safe to eat. We don't need to do that. So we tend to ignore our senses of smell and taste. We don't really switch them on. We don't have to. And when I was running wine courses, I used to run my own wine school for something like 17 years. It was interesting because people were coming along, especially a lot of people just entering their retirement. They're going, Jeremy, we've been tasting wine for 30 years, drinking it, but we still don't know the first thing. This is our last hope. I'm going, don't worry. I'm going to throw you in the deep end. We're doing 4 2.5-hour sessions. The first 2 sessions will drive you crazy. You'll think you'll want to walk out. This is too hard to say. But by sessions 3 and 4, the penny will drop and your mind will have switched and you'll have turned on this apparatus you have and you'll have connected it to your brain, and you're going to start tasting things and saying things and smelling things that you didn't think you could ever do. And this happened all the time. So I believe most people have it within them to be very good at this stuff, but they need to undergo some experience and commitment. It might be a wine course with a very good teacher. It might be some deep dive. It might be a wine tour into a wine region where you really are going deep with winemakers, whatever it is, but we can do it.
Like, to me, that, like in all things, some people have a attitude for, say, with their palate, but it's something definitely that you can, work for the normal punter out there. He thinks, what is this person, how does he smell that?
Absolutely. And I don't think there's necessarily an age limit. I've helped people in their 70s for the first time in their lives actually start to understand this stuff. And you can see the happiness it brings. It's amazing. And I don't think there's a barrier to it. Unless obviously you've got something wrong physically with your sensory detection organs or your brain, but most people are ready to go.
You mentioned that you've ruffled a few feathers with some of your reviews, in particular Henschke. Other stories or moments that stand out when you felt your opinion sparked some controversy?
Gosh, there are so many. I've had people come in looking for me, several of them at one time. I once called a wine rustic, and that was meant as a compliment. It was made in a more of an old worldy style. It was wine made by Stephen George. It was an Ashton Hills Pinot Noir, and he threatened legal action against me for using the word rustic. I mean, fancy that. It was actually a compliment. He took it totally the wrong way. I do remember at the launch of the 2000 Grange, which I still maintain should never have been released, at a tasting in the Houses of Parliament in South Australia with just about every named wine writer on the planet and all the Penfolds hierarchy and the winemakers going back forever. And the 2000 was being launched and Peter Gago was raving about it. James Halliday started raving about it. And I'm sliding under my seat, under my table, do not want to talk. Everyone's raving about it. And Gago looked down, he was emceeing the thing and said, "Oh, Jeremy, what have you got to say?" I said, "Rather not." He said, No, what do you think?" I said, "Well, if you're stupid enough to release it, I'll have to tell the world how bad it is." I said, "Jacobs Creek has just released its 2004 Shiraz Cabernet for $5 a bottle." I said, "It's better than this wine." The room was rather quiet. And he said, eventually he said, "Look, it's not our best Grange ever." I said, "No, for sure." And he said, "Well, because of that, we're not releasing all that much of it." And I said, "Well, that's also mistake number 2. Because you know that if you release a small volume of Grange, it's going to become one of the more expensive on the secondary market, which is also a total contradiction." I said Penfolds should have the courage to say, this is our flagship. And then they do it with 707. If the wine's not good enough, it doesn't get released. So when you buy Grange, you can trust the brand. But no, he said, "No, we have a rule in Penfolds that we have to release Grange every year." I'm going, why? Who sets that rule and why? Is it smart? Should it not be reconsidered? Anyway, it makes them way too much money, or a lot of money. And any company deserves to make money out of selling wine. And if it's a high price or low price, good luck to them. That's their issue. And if they're successful at it, well, good on them. But there's so much smoke and mirrors behind all this, which is the bit that troubles me.
I've heard you speak about some of the challenges currently facing the wine industry in Australia. What do you think are the most significant problems facing Australian winemakers today?
A good one. I was hoping you're going to ask this. I think we've lost our way. We've lost our mojo. We're trying to be all things to all people. We're trying to make wine for the generation growing up in their 20s and who are just not drinking wine. They'll come if they decide they want to drink alcohol. We're worried about making wine that suits what the current unholy alliance of wine show judges, opinion leaders, sommeliers want, which are thin, skinny, sappy, flavourless, fruitless wines from Chardonnay, Pinot, cool climate Shiraz. And we're worried about, because they control so much of the market, these guys. They move as a pack, they judge, they control our show system, or the biggest parts of it. They control a lot of what the restaurants are listing. And I think it's very unhealthy, and I don't believe they're acting in the interests of the consumer. And these people, I was at the Yarra Valley Chardonnay Symposium not that long ago, and they were bemoaning the fact that the public were wanting Chardonnays that were rich and generous and full of flavour. I mean, I can't tell you, Brent, how many people come to me, "Jeremy, I want a rich, buttery Chardonnay. Australia's not making any. Where are they?" And this was raised at this symposium, and people who remain nameless on this podcast were saying, "Oh no, we don't want to be the big, buttery Chardonnay country." Whoa. Well, what's wrong with giving the public what they want? And a lady from Langton's got up, Tamara Grishy. She said, "Oh, look, it's interesting. Some of the biggest selling wines we're selling out of Langton's and Dan Murphy's are Californian Chardonnays that are actually delivering what the consumers want, because Australia isn't delivering to its own consumers." And the answers that the clique giving, it's a marketing problem. We have to tell them they're wrong. And then people say, "Well, why aren't Australian wines doing well overseas?" Well, Australian winemakers don't look at what people in other countries are actually drinking. They still have the view that through marketing spend, organisations as inept historically as Wine Australia can get out there and change the impression. Tell the people in England or California or wherever, Hong Kong, Singapore, Shanghai, that what they're drinking is not what they should be drinking. They should be drinking this stuff from Australia that they're saying is better. Now, you can't do that. That's never succeeded. But the industry seems to believe it can continue to make what it wants and that someone will come up with a silver bullet in marketing, not production, that will solve their problems. So I keep saying, I make myself extremely unpopular by saying it. Why don't you go back to what you were doing in the 1990s, which was saying, where are we? What's the best possible wine we can make from Yarra, Margaret River, Hunter Valley, Barossa, McLaren Vale, wherever? And make those wines and teach people around the world about the individual qualities of our regions and how certain sites and soils and aspects are unique, and our soils are so unique and ancient, and how our old vine vineyards in South Australia are a treasure that no other country can compete against. But we don't do that anymore because we're all trying to homogenise what we do into this, in inverted commas, modern Australian style, which means that a Margaret River Chardonnay will taste exactly the same as a Yarra Valley Chardonnay, which will taste exactly the same as Tasmanian Chardonnay. And you end up drowning in this sea of vanilla. And that's our big problem.
I guess that ties into your earlier statement where you said the Australian market is just changing for the sake of changing. And what's wrong? You guys see old world markets. They're renowned for their, Barolo. You know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
For that.
And when Barolo has changed, as it has done in the last 20 or 30 years, it's actually made the species better. They're growing their fruit better. They're making their wine in a cleaner, more intelligent way. And the species has improved, but it's still identifiable. It's become more identifiable. It has more expression of terroir and regional character. Whereas in Australia, Cabernet is a great example. I'm constantly upset by how hard it is to sell Cabernet. And then you go, well, where are the good Australian Cabernets? You look at Margaret River. They're skinny, they're green. This is Margaret River. And that was making in the 90s and 80s and even the 70s, beautiful structural firm wines that you could put right next to serious Bordeaux and they would fit on the same table without any issue. And now they're skinny and green and they've lost their mojo, they've lost their way. And it's so sad.
With your shifts from critic to distributor, how has your perspective on wine changed and what excites you most about this new chapter?
I think what I'm doing now, by distribution, it's an online retail platform, and we're just starting the process of looking for offline bricks and mortar premises where people can come along, taste wine with us, do courses, learn, experience, buy, all that sort of stuff. So I'm keeping my independence. I'm keeping my journalistic hat. And the thing is with me, Brent, because I've got my 40 years of tasting notes online, if I suddenly start saying a wine is better than it's not, it's all there. People will see if my marks suddenly fly up and the wine hasn't changed. They'll see that I've sold out, but I won't. I can't. It's cost me a fortune over the years, but I sleep well. And so the business is still very much in its infancy. As it grows, I'll be able to spend more and more of my time doing what I'm supposed to be doing, which is tasting, creating content, creating experiences, hosting events, which is the bit that I love. But in the meantime, the distribution bit has taught me a lot about how hard this industry is working to survive at the moment. And even for, the wines that I've got on my platform in our store, I'm very proud of, and I think they're all excellent in their price point, in their style, in their ability to express what they should from their region. But it pains me to see that some of the makers that I have are still struggling in the marketplace. We're a startup business, so we're not able to influence their viability, which is one day what I hope to be able to do. I want to be able to help people who make great wine succeed and survive and thrive and reinvest and make more better wine. That's my ambition. But it pains me to see really good brands struggling. And I've learned so much about the economic side of what it is to be a producer, how hard it is in this current market, and how hard it is for people making really good wines to break through the noise and the sort of the cacophony of the internet and online marketing and the online environment to be heard. many people who have been making wine for 20, 30 years who are yesterday's news. They will never have anyone want to interview them on a podcast. They will never be news again. They will never be fresh. They'll never be rediscovered. But they are making wine at very accessible prices that are totally outstanding, that have so much quality. They're the ones I really feel for. I want to help.
And that ties nicely into my last question. What's one wine or region that you really think's flying under the radar at the moment and maybe should be getting a lot more attention?
First one I thought of when you said that was the Adelaide Hills, which is really odd. Gruneveltliner, to put one in out of left field. Sauvignon Blanc, yes, but that's no longer everyone's cup of tea for good reason. But there's some very good ones in the Adelaide Hills. And the Adelaide Hills is, if you have $30 to $40 in your pocket, you'll get change for a terrific wine. And Pinot has been the surprise. I was dirty on the Adelaide Hills Pinot for quite a couple of decades and more. And now they've figured it out really good. And the other region, we have a lot of Clare Valley wine on the platform. Clare Valley is like, oh yeah, really good Rieslings from time to time. You'll get a great Clare Valley Riesling. But Clare Valley, it has such a complexity and multiplicity of terroir and site and aspect. It has the ability to make great Cabernet, great Shiraz, great Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Riesling, as we know. It does so well across a wide range of varieties, Tempranillo. And the makers there are not ripping people off. It's a different industry to what, say, we find closer to Melbourne, where there are a lot of regions where good average wine will cost someone $65, $75. You spend that in the Clare Valley, you're going to get you'll get a killer of wine. So I would go to them, actually.
It's interesting that you say that. For those who know me, I've always been a huge fan of Clare Valley Riesling. Anything near the Watervale River region, you just can't go wrong. And I tell people, if you see Clare Valley wine on an Asian restaurant menu, give it a go.
Absolutely. Yumcha and Riesling, my God.
Certainly Yumcha and Riesling is one of my favourite pastimes. But it's quite poignant that you mentioned Adelaide Hills. A good friend of mine, Adam Carnaby, who used to be at Seppels, he produces a great table of wines, like you suggest, well priced.
He's a very talented winemaker.
Yeah, he's making a Sauvignon Blanc at the moment, which he would even say is not his favourite style, but there's a market for it, and he can make a bloody good one, to use his words.
And so what you just said there is what I've been railing, not enough people are realising. So Adam is making wine that he doesn't necessarily want to make, but he understands that he's in a business and the business needs to sell wine. And you can make really good Sauvignon Blanc out of the Adelaide Hills, even if you don't take it home and drink it yourself. So that's a much more intelligent approach. And not enough of our guys are doing that.
So Jeremy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Your journey from wine critic to distributor is a fascinating one, and your insights into the world of wine, whether it's appreciating aged bottles, developing a palate, or tackling the challenges facing Australian winemakers, has been truly invaluable. Before we wrap up things entirely, Jeremy, I have a little segment I like to call Glass Half Full. The rules are simple: one question, one answer, no swirling, sniffing, or second guessing, just straight up honesty. So let's pour a glass and get into it. Cork or screw cap?
Screw cap.
Burgundy or Bordeaux?
Bordeaux right now.
Ashes or World Cup?
The Ashes. That was the easiest one.
Shiraz or Pinot?
In Australia, Shiraz.
Old World or New World?
I think Old World, New World is a state of mind. Old World.
Riesling or Chardonnay?
Riesling.
Truffles or Parmesan?
Ha! Together. For me, Parmesan.
Organic or conventional? Seems weird to call it conventional.
I would say professional, which can be both. Yeah, interesting. Organic, as long as it's not the reason people are trying to sell their wine, as long as it makes the wine better.
Decant or not to decant?
Ha! Depends on what we have.
And lastly, who's your all-time favourite cricketer?
Oh, gosh. That is an even split between Greg Chappell and Dennis Lilly.
I was originally going to say Lilly or Warning, but was talked out of it, so it would have been Lilly anyway. And that wraps up Glass Half Full with Jeremy Oliver. 11 questions, 11 answers, straight to the point, just like a great bottle. And thanks again, Jeremy, for joining us today and sharing your insights, humour and expertise.
Absolute pleasure, Brent. Thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Behind the Wines. A huge thank you for joining us. Your support means everything. Like a good wine, the best stories are meant to be shared. So make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, leave a comment, and let us know your thoughts on our socials. And go to our website for some more stories, special offers, upcoming events, and exclusive content. And special thanks to PS Wine Selections for your ongoing support. Until next time, cheers.